nice to see you. I want to point out for the people at home who can't see, she is wearing a Let's Sue the Government t-shirt.
We have great designers at EFF. They made this special.
What is EFF, and what is that?
The Electronic Frontier Foundation is the world's biggest and oldest digital rights organization. We were founded in 1990. Our basic goal is to make sure that when you go online, your rights go with you. So we do things around free speech, around privacy, and around trying to build an internet that stands with you rather than against you.
How did you know? It's so prescient. The idea, I'm thinking back to 1990. Mm-hmm. And the internet was, you had a little AOL disk, yeah?
Well, maybe 95 or 6 for that.
Right,
yeah.
It might have been, it was just like alt-binary message boards.
Yeah.
How did you all have the prescience to see that this could be turned into a tool of surveillance and of government repression?
Yeah, I mean, the founders of the EFF, John Perry Barlow, John Gilmore, and Mitch Kapor were involved in some early FBI missteps around the internet, and they
worked with the FBI, or they were like hacker dudes?
No, they were like questioned by the FBI, and there were a lot of raids going on, and there was they weren't raided, but they were asked a bunch of questions, and they realized that the government didn't really understand how the internet was working either. At least the FBI didn't, and they thought, we need to start an organization that's gonna think about how our civil liberties work in the digital age. Right. And a couple of them are pretty geeky, and they realized that the internet we were building was not very secure. It didn't have a lot of privacy or security in it.
Right.
And the first fight we did was to try to free up a technology called encryption that now is the reason that we have the privacy and security we have online. Most of it
this is your first lawsuit.
First big case.
And you joined this because you're a lawyer and you're interested in this space, or you had met these guys? How did your involvement?
I met them kind of by chance. Honestly, they showed up at a party at my house, some of them. But I was
This is all sounding very... Where did this take place?
San Francisco.
Okay!
In the Haight, yeah.
Now I'm understanding.
But
There's a tub of Kool-Aid, somebody put something in something.
It got a little messy. No, I was a human rights lawyer. I had done human rights. I've been in Geneva, and I came back to San Francisco to try to start a regular law practice. Right. And I met some of these guys kind of really by chance. And they were already online. You know, this was 1990, 1991. They were online at this very early internet before we had the World Wide Web, but they were doing really cool things. They were collaborating across distance. They were having these long chats back and stuff that we take for granted now, but was pretty magical back then.
It's really interesting, too, that they and you decided, because I remember that time as a gold rush. So the 90s, as it started, this was when, like, every internet startup, anybody that you knew that was even adjacent, if they had a word processor, they were a startup. Yeah. And they wanted VC funding, and they were going to, you know, make a ton of money. And you and this group decide, we're not going in that direction. We're going to go in the protecting citizens' rights direction, where the real money is.
Yeah.
Why would you?
My stock options are so great.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, look, I think that there are people who, you know, plenty of people in the early internet were interested in making money. I don't have any judgment about that. Sure. But we were thinking about how could this be a technology that supports people, how it could be a technology of freedom, how it could give people, you know, more power against the powerful forces in their lives. And they were, again, very forward-looking, and they, you know, created an organization to try to do that. I don't know where it comes from. And for me, I've always just wanted to make the world better. And then I found, you know, I'm not a technical person, but I kind of landed in this place in this time and was able to do it.
In 90, and then so you're working over this sort of decade, and you get this great encryption case, and you make it so that people have a right to encrypt their data and these kinds of things. But then 9/11 happens.
Correct.
And that really supercharges the surveillance state.
Yeah, after 9/11, the Patriot Act, both the Patriot Act, which they did above board, and a lot of stuff that we later discovered as a country they were doing secretly.
Right.
Really,
these metadata, these hoovering up of all of our data and putting it through processing.
Yeah, tapping into the internet backbone, collecting metadata, collecting telephone records. Some of this you might be able to read in the Patriot Act, but most of it was really under secret interpretations and things like that.
Right.
But they had really flipped from the idea that you needed probable cause, you needed a warrant, you needed individualized suspicion, to doing mass surveillance first and figuring out what they need second. And that has only increased as the technology has increased.
Was it that they had decided to treat virtual world as separate from physical world? In other words, the rules of like the Fourth Amendment might not apply to your digital life in the way that it would apply to your house.
Yeah, although they were using some earlier stuff that's in the non-digital world. This idea that metadata isn't protected, but the content of
metadata meaning like the date and time and location and the other things that go along with your digital life.
Correct. But they were using an analogy from envelopes and letters in, the actual physical world. But in the digital world, the metadata is much more powerful. It can tell you a lot. There's a very famous quote, from a member of the NSA saying, "We kill people with metadata," right? Because when you are able to collect it at scale and analyze it, you can do a lot more with it than kind of the old school envelopes and and
I don't remember anybody
content.
saying we kill people with envelopes.
It hasn't happened that I know of.
It hasn't happened.
But so this is one of the things. They took this distinction that is actually an offline distinction that may have made some sense. I'm not sure it did. But in the online world, it really has eroded our privacy, and it's being used in ways now that are increasingly visible, right? I mean, there's testimony in Oregon just last month from an ICE agent saying they used a Google-like thing to identify where people were that they ended up doing an ICE raid. So that's...
And the company Palantir is very proud of the fact that they're sending metadata to accomplish those things, that these large tech companies are working with the company. So now is your fight, are you fighting two behemoths? Are you fighting the government and also the tech companies?
Absolutely. I mean, we kind of always were, right? That if you think about the post-9/11 surveillance, they didn't come to us and ask us for our telephone records, right? They went to the telephone companies. That's where they got it. So they've always gone through the companies that provide us services in order to get information. But now the number one purchaser of information from data brokers is the government. And, FBI Director Kash Patel just said to Congress, we're going to keep doing it. So it was something they were doing a little of, and now they're really supercharging it and doing it at a level that's much greater than it was before. But you're right, we don't really have the luxury of a choice about whether we care more about government surveillance or private surveillance. They work hand in hand and kind of always have.
How receptive have the courts been to the arguments that people's privacy is part and parcel to their security?
I mean, good and bad. I think we've got a Supreme Court that's somewhat hostile to the idea that privacy is a harm at all. But we see a lot of lower courts, being courageous. I mean, in many other issues, we're seeing the same dynamic where we've got a lot of lower courts who are worried about people's privacy, both in the commercial context and in the law enforcement context. We've been chipping away at this post-9/11 surveillance. We've made a lot of progress over time, not kind of in a, one fell swoop, but chipping away. And Congress has stepped in and done a little. They need to do a lot more. And there's a big vote coming up in April on some of the mass surveillance. It's called FISA Section 702. So we're continuing the fight. We have to continue the fight, but we've also come quite a ways from where we were right after 9/11, where all this stuff was secret and massive.
What do you want people to know? How are we culpable in the dismantling of our own security? And by that I mean, I don't understand at all. I just click sure. Like, whenever it always comes on and like, is it okay if we try? And I'm just like, I just want to buy shoes. Like, so I just click and I do things, and I don't know what I've given up.
Yeah, I really think that's blaming the victim. You're the victim here.
Thank God.
This is cooked. This is not set up so you have a real choice, right?
I don't. Thank you.
So we need to fix this, but we need to fix it with law, with policy, maybe with better technologies. But, like, I think that the idea that individuals should bear responsibility for this, it's pretty down far on the list of things, because it's not like we have other options, right? I mean, we do for some things. I think it's great if you want to use an end-to-end encrypted tool like Signal rather than, you know, a tool that's not. There are tools that can help you, but I don't think that you should be blamed, because the game is rigged against you on a lot of these privacy things. And, you know, I think one of the original sins of the internet is everything is these little click wraps, where I think somebody did a study. It would take you 37 years to read all the terms of service that you agree to in an ordinary internet experience.
That's crazy, because I'm halfway through. I'm about halfway through.
It's not fair and it's not right. We have to fix this with something other than personal responsibility.
So who bears that responsibility then? If I'm the victim, who is the party that I'm going after? Am I going after Palantir? Am I going after, they just had this big lawsuit where I think Meta was held responsible for certain, so they get held responsible for that. Or is it that, what am I trying to prevent? Am I trying to prevent the government from getting access to all of this data that should be proprietary for me? Am I trying to keep Meta and X and Instagram and all those other mega corporations or Palantir from being able to, or even AI? Look,
AI supercharges things.
Here's what's crazy. So AI basically runs on, it's basically strip mining the totality of human existence. It basically takes everything that we have ever accomplished through chemistry and poetry and art and music, and it's fed into it. And it gets to take everything that we are, almost our essence. And then if you ask OpenAI, well, what are you doing with it? They go, that's proprietary.
Well, so there's a few things there, and there's a lot going on in that question. But
I'm the victim.
I'm sorry, you are the victim. And the first thing that you need to say is, I want a comprehensive privacy law. I want a law that limits what these companies can track us. Just limits it. We can do this. We don't need a surveillance business model. Moses didn't come down from the mountain with stone tablets that says the only way to make money on the internet is by spying on everyone. So that's the good news. We can do better.
But he was, to be fair, wearing those Meta glasses. He was recording.
There you go. Well, because he wanted to know who people were. But I think that there's that. I also think, a comprehensive privacy law that says when information is collected from you for one purpose, it can't be used for another purpose without a lot more than a click wrap here, and a very, very high standard. And one of the things that can't be done is just handed to the government without a warrant.
Who fights that, the government or the tech company?
They both do. We got to take them both on, but I think we have to. Otherwise, we can lose now or we can fight and lose later. I think we need to fight.
Why is this technology so difficult for the government to wrap its arms around? There were very clearly guardrails put into place for radio and television and the airwaves, and it was considered a public good, and it was a certain utility, and there were a lot of responsibilities associated with it. Why has this been so much more difficult to wrap our arms around? Is it because it's faster?
No, it's because it's not. The airwaves are regulated because there was a minimal amount of them. That's why cable doesn't have nearly the regulation that the broadcast
Oh, bless
does.
your heart. That is correct.
But the internet isn't limited. It doesn't have limited, broadcast airwaves or things like that. So it could let everybody speak. I think that's a good thing. And I especially think that with the current regulators we have in power, we should be very careful about arguing for a new regulatory structure over the internet. I think that I'd like to see a comprehensive privacy law. There's plenty of laws that we could pass, but I'm not sure granting, creating a second Brendan Carr for the internet is good for the internet.
Right. Well, it's hard because, what you hope is that regulation is written you know, the difficulty sometimes with government is they write regulation and then the courts who are textualists, like for instance, there's these immigration cases that are now rolling through the courts. And the idea for immigration is the phrase, arrive on America's shores. And they're all arguing about, does that mean you're first in line at the port of entry? Does that mean, or if you're fifth in line, is that okay? And it's really a failure of the imagination of Congress to write these laws. But we have to guard against these false choices.
Yes.
I would think of, I don't want to regulate harm reduction because I'm worried that the government may not be what I like if they misuse it. Or is that...
I mean, I think that's right fully. I don't think it's a regulate or not kind of choice. But I think you do need to think about what you're regulating and why and who you're empowering. And a lot of the things that we see coming out of Congress right now that are regulation would either entrench the current tech giants and make it impossible for somebody else to start a different kind of social network.
Talk about that. What do you mean by that?
I mean, some of the stuff that OpenAI said they wanted to do for AI that was regulatory basically would mean that we could never have civic AI. We could never have community kinds of
they would monopolize the space because they would have the power to build in the loopholes or fight or do any of those things. But don't they really have, I mean, doesn't that exist now?
Well, it exists now, but we could make it worse, right? I mean, we don't double down on that.
So here's an interesting one. I'm curious what you would say about, should we hold social media companies liable for harms, or do you consider that, where does that fit on your shouldn't restrict free speech with should protect Americans from harm?
I mean, I think that one of the worries that I have on the regulatory, on the legal side, is that the Republican definition of harm and the Democratic definition of harm are very, very different, right? The Republicans don't think any LGBTQ content. They think that harms kids.
Right.
And so we're seeing a couple of laws being floated in Congress now that will hold the companies responsible for harms. And what that's going to mean is they're not going to let any of that content on it, because if somebody claims they were harmed because their kid saw a trans person, they're going to be able to sue the company. So I worry about, until we get really clear on what we mean by harms and shared agreement, right now, I think you really have to ask yourself, like, why are the Republicans supportive of this, and how are they defining this? And some Democrats should know better, in my opinion, because I think they're getting played. I think that that's a kind of different question than your social media question, the individual liability questions. I think that's a hard one too sometimes, because I think that it's easy to blame technology for what are kind of complicated human problems. I'm not saying it doesn't have.
Well, the reason why I say it is because in my mind, Meta, Instagram, Twitter are not free speech. They're algorithmically driven speech. It's processed, like in the way Doritos is food. So it strikes me as like that's actually not, because free speech doesn't have a hierarchy. There is not blue checks on free speech. There's not ways to their business model does not monetize hostility or other things. Like I don't consider those social media companies free speech. I consider it monetized, incentivized, algorithmic cluster that exist to create.
I mean, I think this might be a difference where we disagree, because I really think that you decide who gets to go on your show every night. You decide what goes on the front of your show. Newspapers decide what goes on the headline, and they do it based on how to try to sell more newspapers. I'm not defending everything. I don't like these companies. Don't get me wrong. I want to undercut their entire business model.
Sure.
But I think that when your strategy for doing that is encouraging censorship, there's a lot of people who don't get to speak. They don't get to be on your show. They don't get to be on the New York Times, but they get to speak.
Here's the flip side of it, and I would just push back gently, is that I think the current toxicity of social media is far more censorious of free speech. Most of the people that I know don't want to engage in that toxic soup. And immediately they do, they're hit with all kinds of terrible, terrible things. And like Reddit's an example. Reddit was a sinkhole. Like 10, 15 years ago, that was a shithole. And they cleaned it up. And you can actually go on it now and have a human experience.
Right, and I think that it's important to continue to foster places for people to go so that when you look around and you realize you're in the Nazi bar, you can leave and go to another bar.
But
right?
the thing is, you don't know. The algorithm doesn't tell you that they've notified the Nazis that you're there. It's not transparent. Like on a newspaper, when they say our top story, you see it. But it's like with advertising. They outlawed subliminal messaging.
Yeah.
Because it's not conscious. The algorithm is unconscious. It's doing things to you that you don't see in the way that you don't see that in a food lab they're taking a raccoon's anus and turning it into raspberry flavoring.
I think that the worry that I have is that if you want somebody to develop a better version, you can't create instant liability anytime somebody gets mad that their kid saw trans content.
But that's,
you can't.
But that's a false choice.
We need better options, and people are developing them. Right? There's the whole Mastodon universe. I know it's not very big yet, but it's a decentralized place where people can build safe communities for themselves. There are,
but think about it as environmental protection. Can't we just view it as in the same way we view environmental protection? If there are toxins, we put it in the air, and downstream of those are decisions that we make. And when you put those regulations in, you could say, well, that's just going to help the big corporations and all that. But don't we have to, at some level, use regulation to mitigate very real-world harms that are occurring at this moment through those companies?
I think that when you pick censorship as your strategy, that's what you want to do.
No.
You want to create liability for the company based on things that people say to each other on the network. And what you're doing is you're saying you should make sure that those people can't speak on your network because they're causing harm on your platform. And I worry that
we do that. Don't we do that already with all forms of communication? There are libel laws. There are slander. Isn't that censorship? I can't say things on this show that are patently untrue with malevolence because we regulate that harm.
Well, I mean, you can always sue the people who are harming you on the platforms. The question is secondary liability.
Cat turd 161?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, but also, I just want people to be able to leave. And I think that if we wrote a paper a little while ago called Privacy First. And we did a little thought experiment about all of these social harms that are happening in other places and what the world would look like if we just cut the knees out of the business model of surveillance. And they don't go away, but they get a lot smaller. And I think that there's a lot of things that we could try. I'd also like to see a lot more support for kids. I really think that a lot of the cases that are horrible that we're seeing, there's usually a lot of other things going on in these kids' lives, and we don't do a good job of taking care of them. But I worry, I think that the censorship strategy feels really easy, and it feels really powerful, and I worry it's going to backfire. I really do.
I understand. I guess my only point is I think we define censorship slightly differently.
We might.
And we always go, and I look at it more as like with cigarette smoking, like social media to me is like secondhand smoke sometimes. In that I didn't choose to do it, but because of the algorithm, it still shows up for me.
And if you shipped over to Blue Sky, you don't have an algorithm feeding you things. I mean,
but if I shipped over to Blue Sky, then the world no longer makes sense.
I'm sorry about that. I mean, honestly, but I think that the answer is more options for people. I think that a world in which there are 5 big media companies that decide everything that we see and how we see it, the answer isn't to try to take a dictator and make them a better dictator, right? We've got these social media dictators. The answer is to get rid of the dictators and make them less important.
All right. Well done. And we do that through the Privacy Act.
The
Privacy Act and defending our data.
And defending our data.
I love it. Well, thank you for a really thought-provoking and inspiring conversation that truly does make me look at it in a different way, because I'm coming at it from this way, and now I'm seeing it a bit from this way, and I appreciate it.
Thank you. This was fun.
Cindy's book, Privacy's Defender. It's a great read. Cindy Cohn.